Hey everyone, time for another tutorial. Now recently I put a poll up on my Patreon page and I put a few different options of what technique you'd like to learn next. Now it turns out you guys are wanting something a little bit more advanced, so this time we're going to do up to fronts because you guys chose it. Now if you don't know what up to front is, or maybe even call it a different name, I think some people call it a wheel swap. Often people will just go straight up to back wheel, but there are quite a few occasions where going up to your front wheel first is quite an advantage. Now this is quite a trial specific move. There's not really any scenario out on the trails on the mountain bike where this would really be needed, but saying that, it is possible to do this on a mountain bike if you just wanted to learn a few tricks. One thing that is super vital for this move in particular is having extremely powerful brakes, especially the front brake. So if you're going to go and try this move yourself, make sure your front brake is working the best it can, and ideally the back brake as well. I'm going to be covering a few different techniques in this tutorial. I'm going to cover how to actually physically swap from your front wheel to your back wheel. I'm going to cover approach speeds, where to have your body weight, all stuff like that. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have everything you need to go out and get these up to fronts for yourselves. But I think before I take this onto any walls, I'm going to just show you on the flat the technique of swapping from the front wheel to the back wheel. Now, like I mentioned, this is a fairly advanced trials move, so by this point you ideally need to be pretty good at endos, bunnyhops and back wheel control. If you are needing tips on any of those techniques, I do have tutorials on those out already, and I'll put the link in the description below. But I think that's enough chat, let's get on with it. Firstly, we're going to practice swapping from the front wheel to the back on the flat, starting with a simple endo. There are two ways to accomplish the swap. You can either let go of the front brake and let the bike roll forwards, allowing your back wheel to land where the front was. Or you can lift the front wheel with a hop. This is extremely useful if you're doing this move on a narrow wall or rail. The rollout method is the simplest and is a great starting point. It saves energy and looks pretty smooth when done nicely. Start by doing an endo. How high is up to you. The higher it is, the less horizontal distance the rear wheel has to travel, but the more chance of going over the bars. Once you reach the height you want, you simply release the front brake and naturally let the bike roll forwards. The trick is to try and keep your weight back, so stay crouched and let your arms straighten out. This will train you to have your weight centered over the back, allowing you to keep on the rear wheel when on narrow walls. Adding the hop isn't all that difficult, but it will help if you're already able to nollie. That's simply a bunny hop, but you lift the back wheel before the first. This is great practice for getting the feel of the motion. The hop from the front wheel is very similar to that of the wheel swap. Once you have the rear wheel up, start to transfer your weight back and add a small lift on your arms. I add a tiny bit of preload with my hips and shoulders, but lifting the rear wheel would have added a bit of upwards momentum, which you can use to help. Don't worry about aiming for any marks on the ground just yet. This is purely getting the feel of the motion. Hopefully you're getting the feel of lifting up from the front wheel now. Let's take away the momentum and try this from an endo. This is literally just a case of combining the endo roll with a nollie. Once you're consistently starting to get the swap, we can try and add a bit of accuracy. I found a square bit of plywood which will make a perfect target. You can also use a curb, a chalk line or anything else that gives a visual clue to where the wheels need to swap. Although having something small means less chance of a puncture if you hit your rear wheel off it. Just like before, you can try the rolling technique or the hop technique. Either way, the goal is to try and have the back wheel land as close to where the front wheel was as possible. You can try doing a small hop onto the endo, although this doesn't translate well when hopping on walls, as I'll explain now as we take this a little bit higher. I've found there's a minimum height that an up to front works. Below that height, it's not worth doing a hop. Take this block for example. At this height, the bike easily rolls up. Sometimes when trying to hop up to front on lower walls, the front wheel actually has a downwards momentum, and this can make you miss the edge and go over the bars. You're much better off just rolling the front wheel up first and then doing an endo and then swapping. A rolling endo wheel swap is a great way to get up lower walls. I use this technique multiple times a ride. A bunny hop up to front just isn't needed on lower walls. This is roughly the minimum height I would consider doing a bunny hop up to front. It's a height where I can't roll up without my bash hitting. When doing an up to front, I generally have the same speed as an up to rear, maybe verging on slightly slower. Going faster does help, but it's scarier and I find it's harder to be as accurate. There are different ways to get your weight over the front. One common mistake I see people make is by moving the hips forwards to get the weight over. This can work, but it doesn't look as nice, and once you start to try higher walls, it can be harder to get the front tyre to grip. Rather than using your hips to get your weight forwards, it's better to use your torso. Bending your arms and keeping your chest close to the bars is a more effective way to use your weight. It generates more front tyre grip and you're in a better position for the wheel swap. And yeah, I got some pretty funny looks doing this. The other mistake I see people making is not aiming for the corner, although this isn't as important on lower walls, especially if you have good weight placement. Aiming for the corner is also vital when you start getting even skinnier walls or even rails. It's also worth noting that if the wall is wide enough to allow it, I often stay off my back brake a split second after the rear wheel hits. That lets me be a little bit more casual with the actual swap, and it makes the move a little bit smoother. Although I don't expect people new to the technique to do this, but it's something to add when you can. Okay, I've moved to a much higher wall now. This is where getting on the corner is a real advantage. I found it can be hard to hit the corner when aiming for the top, so I actually aim a few inches below and that usually helps. Once the walls start to get higher, the bike will be at a much lower angle when the front tyre hits, making it much more likely to slide. Aiming for the corner gets you a lot more grip. As an example, this is what happens when I miss the corner and or don't have my weight placement right. Here you can see I had my hips too far forward. I also missed the corner, although I think I would have made it up if I had better weight use. This is an example of how effective better weight placement can be. I got on the corner quite nicely and I had my weight really far forward. This let me lift the back wheel all the way up into front hops. Now this is one of the better ones I did. Let's break it down and go into detail. On the approach, I'm going at a similar speed as to go into back wheel. I'm looking a few inches lower than the top of the wall and I'm in an attack position ready for the preload. What speed you go will determine how far away from the wall you hop, but for these big hops I've preloaded and I'm ready to hop roughly 1.5 meters away from the wall. Hop too early and you can come up short with the front wheel, which is pretty much the worst case scenario. Hop too late and you're likely just to go straight to bash guard. The front wheel lift is very similar to a normal big hop. The only difference is I have my weight slightly further forwards. Already starting to transfer my weight over the front wheel, I have just this moment applied the brakes. The rear wheel lift is just like a normal big hop, but you can see my weight is still being transferred over the front. My brakes are now completely locked. At the point my front wheel hits, I've slightly bent my legs as my body keeps its momentum and travels forward. I'm still trying to get my torso over the bars and front wheel. I let the momentum and my weight placement carry me to the highest point I think it will get to. I've started to push on the bars a little like an endo, which transfers my weight over to the back of the bike. Throughout the move I've had a slight scoop on my pedals. It's a very subtle motion, almost like this tension between my arms and my feet. It's not what is generating the rear wheel to keep lifting, although it did initiate it. It's just there to keep my feet stuck to the pedals. I'm now about to release the front brake. At the mid-swap point, the rear wheel is dropping thanks to the motion of lifting the front wheel and gravity. My body weight is staying in pretty much the same place. The bike is essentially pivoting at an imaginary spot near my knees. Once the rear wheel has made contact, it has come directly under my centre of gravity and I have my back brake locked. The final step is to get comfortable on the rear wheel, adding a hop or a slight pedal stroke if needed, then you're set to finish the line how you please. If you're starting to get comfortable with the timing and accuracy, the next step is to take this to a rail. There's no room for error here, you have to get on the edge, otherwise you'll just get thin air or a face full of rail. Rails are not much harder than walls, but they are definitely scarier. It normally takes me a few attempts to get the feel of them. A bit like higher walls, I try to aim a little bit lower than the top. This is again to get more grip, but it also helps as the wheel will roll up the rail slightly, meaning I'll actually be on top of it mid-wheel swap rather than sliding off the other side. There may be times that you need to put a foot down too. Try not to panic, just spot the rail and your foot should reach it fine. You can see here I landed just an inch or so below the corner of the rail, and then my wheel ended up perfectly on top when it came to do the wheel swap. If you want to take this to the next level, then you can jump from the front wheel and clear the rail completely with the rear. I think these look really cool, but they take a lot more commitment than a regular wheel swap. Again, bonus points for going straight and not twisting. These are just the same as a wheel swap, except I keep my weight forwards for longer and let the front wheel roll over the rail. As long as it doesn't slip, then the steeper you go, the easier it is to clear. When it comes to the hop, I put a little bit more effort into it. The tyre also gets a nice little boost from the compression on the rail, so it's not a full effort hop. I often try to time it so both wheels land at the same time, but you can force the back wheel down sooner for a rear wheel landing. So there you go everyone, hopefully that has given you enough advice that you can go out and start doing up to fronts. As with all things trials related, timing and body position is key. Like I mentioned at the start, it is possible to do this on other types of bikes. Having a trials bike does make it a lot easier, and if you are trying it on a mountain bike, you're probably not going to get some of the super high stuff, and maybe even some of the rail stuff is going to be pretty tricky as well, but it is definitely possible. If you'd like to see a more detailed version of this tutorial, I have a Patreon channel where I upload extra long, extra detailed versions of these. The link is down in the description. I've got a few reward tiers on there, Facebook groups, private groups, and even where I can review videos that you send to me. So please check that out. If you want to get really good at trials, I can do my best to help you on there. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of this tutorial. Was there anything I missed, or were there any tips that you've learned when you're trying these techniques that have helped you and could help other people? Either way, I hope you enjoyed this one. Please check out my future videos, subscribe if you like it, and I'll catch you next time. So take care everyone, bye bye. Oh, this is nice.